All right, we are live. We'll give folks a couple more seconds to join us here. And with that, it is 11 o'clock. Thank you. Welcome to our webinar, First Time EV Buyer's Guide, What to Know Before Going Electric. So this webinar is for anybody who is considering entering the electric vehicle buying process, or in the middle of the buying process, or maybe you're just curious. So we're going to really just demystify the EV buying process by shedding some light on really the public's most begged questions surrounding this. With that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. First off, you've got me. I'm Nick. I'm your host. With that, we have Mike Derone and Ralph Pompey. Mike, would you like to give a quick introduction?
Hi, I'm Mike Derone. I work for GM, but also in here just as a EV aware wife, EV purchased with a Volt, and aware of and working on EVs at GM. So just a little bit of all points of view and all knowledge.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. Ralph, would you like to do a quick intro?
Yeah, sure, Nick. So I'm happy to be co-hosting or with Mike as well. My name's Ralph Pompey. I've got about 37 years of history in service readiness activities, assisting OEMs launching vehicles into the marketplace. I'm a Ferris State grad of their automotive heavy equipment technology program. And from an electric vehicle perspective, you know, from support of the Volt to other OEMs launches, from the support side of things, how do you fix it? How are you safely interact with it? So happy to talk about first time buying today.
Awesome. Well, thank you both, gentlemen. Appreciate you guys attending. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. Just to set the stage a little bit. Again, this is for anybody who's considering an electric vehicle purchase. And what we're going to do is we're really going to break it down for you. We're going to go into, the cost of EV ownership. We're going to go into different aspects of charging, different types of charging, and overall, what do you need to consider to ensure that your purchase is really going to match your lifestyle? So with that, let's get into the first question. This one's pretty broad. Can electric vehicles do everything I need them to do? Ralph, let's just kind of start there at the highest level. What's your opinion on EVs being able to do everything you need them to do as a consumer, as a driver?
So for me personally, they do. I have an EV on order, and just because of supply chain issues, it hasn't arrived yet. But this is a very personal question. So you have to look at your driving habits today. We're kind of past the early adopters and we're into going more mainstream. But if you're driving 30, 40 miles a day to and from work, you should definitely look at an EV vehicle. If you're a salesman and you're on the road, multiple hundreds of miles every day or every week, the infrastructure's at its beginning. So you'd have to do a little more planning. Doesn't mean that an EV is not good for you too, depending on the range of the one you purchase, but more planning, more forethought. It's not like today where there's a gas station on every corner. For those of you who are a little older like me, you can remember when there was 4 gas stations on every corner. That's not the case anymore today, but they're still very plentiful. There's a lot of applications either supported by the OEMs or by the independent aftermarket that give you multiple ways to find charging stations. So a little bit of that upfront research would make you feel comfortable in that purchase decision. There you go.
Thanks, Ralph. No, it's really comprehensive. Mike, what are your thoughts on EVs being able to, match the needs that we have today with internal combustion engine vehicles? And in your response, would you mind just touching a little bit on how maybe different types of climate might affect that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, like Ralph said, it's individual to everybody, and how you use a vehicle and what you do with it and what you need out of it. So it does need some knowledge that we can share here and other places around what are the limitations of what can and cannot do compared to an internal combustion engine. But it can do a lot for a lot of people, and it's being expanding, and more uses are getting easier and easier also. So with a little bit of knowledge and awareness, yeah, you can figure out what's right for you, and can you get the benefits of an EV and be able to go there. From a environment perspective as far as, yeah, is it affected when it gets colder? Yes, colder and even hotter with the AC. Colder is a bigger impact. But what you got to think about and know is just that now you're using, there's no, I'll say, free heat coming from the engine that can warm you up in the wintertime. So now you need to use some battery power to be able to warm the vehicle up. But with planning and knowledge, it becomes easier. And, if you're using it and need all of it, do you store it in a garage and be able to have it be warmer and have it pre-warmed in the morning so that you're not using part of your range to warm up the vehicle in the morning? Or you don't need all that range and you can go ahead and do that. It kind of works both ways. The other is just where you're driving. Up and down hills is a significant thing. When you live in the mountains in Colorado or somewhere and you got to drive out of Denver and drive up to Eisenhower up at the top of the pass, it requires a lot more to go up that hill. And in a gas or diesel engine, you can stop along the way a lot easier if you weren't thinking about it when you left. So that does make an impact. But then you also know that going down the other side of the mountain, you get a lot of it back. So it is a huge benefit there, which you don't get back.
Yeah, for sure.
in-
Which really
in
isn't
an
all.
internal combustion.
Yeah, which isn't all that crazy different from an internal combustion engine because you're going to use more gasoline, more fuel to be able to get up one side of the mountain, right? But when it comes to what would you say to somebody who is considering buying an EV, Mike, that was looking to buy an electric vehicle for your standard commuter, right? I'm driving 40, 50 miles a day. I'm going back and forth to work, maybe the grocery store, just normal types of things. What would you say to somebody who was coming from that vantage point, and or do you know anybody who owns an EV that you might be able to share some experience on?
Yeah, so that fits in. Like I said, my wife is a Volt driver, and to the 40, 50 mile range, that's really what it gets out of the battery. And so for her, most of the commute around town, coming and going, really for sure through the summertime, she rarely has to put gas in unless she's going far. So she is able to plug in overnight, fill up the battery overnight, and then be able to have the 40, 50 miles range that she can use all day. And then, compared to that being with the gas engine, it gets the extension to be able to drive to Chicago or something with the gas. Whereas with an EV, now you have to plug in partway there, or when you get there, it's a little bit different. But around town, for sure, it's very similar to a Volt experience.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate that. And, just my opinion on whether EVs can do everything they need them to do is really just get out there and do some research too. I mean, there are companies out there that market themselves as adventure companies where you can take your electric vehicle, camping and even, across state lines to be able to go and, be able to go camping and even cook a meal. Right. So like Rivian, for instance, right. They've got a whole pullout on the side of their truck to where you've got a whole kitchen out there. So I definitely agree. I think they can do everything they need to. Now, when it comes to getting more into the nitty gritty of things, there's a lot of terminology that surrounds electric vehicles that are new to a lot of folks, right? We've got all these different acronyms. We've got EV, which is electric vehicle. We've got HEV, which is hybrid electric vehicle. We've got BEV, which is battery electric vehicle, right? We've got PHEV, which is plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. There's a ton. But I think the one that most folks are probably going to be most interested in, since most of those are somewhat old news, is really when it comes to, kilowatt hours, because that's how you measure the energy with these electric vehicles, right? Is by kilowatt hours. So Mike, just looking to get a little bit of background from you is, what the heck is a kilowatt hour and why should folks even care?
So kilowatt hour is a measure of energy, right? And you're talking battery, it's got a certain amount of energy in it. But the easy way to think about transitioning between it is we're used to talking about gallons and gallons of fuel. And a gallon of fuel is really a measurement of energy. We just used gallon instead of however many kilowatts of energy there are in that gallon of gas. And so now we're measuring it in kilowatt hours, so just a different size of number, but it's a similar kind of thing. So we're used to thinking about miles per gallon of gas, and really that's miles per energy. And so it's how many kilowatts hours are being used for every mile is a similar kind of thing that we're used to thinking in miles per gallon.
Understood. And that really only applies to, electric vehicles, not so much the hybrid electric, because they're still running a petrol or an internal combustion engine type vehicle. But Ralph, looking to hear a little bit from you in terms of, EVs and these different types of outfits when it comes to, true electric vehicles versus hybrid electric. Even there's, fuel cell vehicles out there too, right? So could you shed a little bit of light for the audience in terms of the different, maybe some of the high level differences between some of those different platforms?
Certainly. So, as you mentioned, the BEV, the battery electric vehicle, that's kind of the wave of new market entries and technology that's coming out today and more prevalently from every manufacturer. So if you look at the 5-year plan for the majority of the OEM market in the next 5 years, it's all pretty much battery electric vehicles. And that is, no internal combustion engine. We've seen the skateboards where all the infrastructure is kind of on the frame down low, and you can put different passenger compartments on the same technology. That seems to be where the market's going. The next one I'd mention is the hybrid electric vehicle was kind of the first thing out several years ago, and it was where the gasoline engine kind of runs the generator. No connection to the wheels. It runs the electric motor and charges the battery. Just straight hybrid vehicle, you have to put fuel in it to charge the vehicle. The PHEV, the plug-in electric hybrid vehicle, the interesting thing there, it kind of blended the two worlds together and said, not just internal combustion engine that charges a battery and drives the vehicle, but let's also have a plug to leverage the benefits of charging while you're stopped or overnight. So you could get a PHEV, keep it at your parking location and start your trip completely charged, deplete the battery, and then your gasoline engine would start and charge and keep you driving. Whereas if you had a standard hybrid electric vehicle, you start with whatever level charge you have and run it and charge it while you're using it. So those are kind of the big differences there. And then you mentioned I'm forgetting the term you mentioned.
Fuel cell electric?
Yeah, the fuel cell. Thank you, Nick. So
Yeah.
The fuel cell is not electric at all, but definitely is a different power source that some fleets are starting to use. And the benefit of testing a fuel cell with a fleet environment is you can have a central fueling station. You don't have to worry about a fuel cell stop along your way. It's going back to home base every night and being filled at the same location.
Mhm.
But those are the flavors of vehicles that we're seeing on the roads today. And most of those can take advantage of the HOV lanes, the high occupancy vehicle lanes, because of that hybrid technology.
Mhm. No, absolutely. No, it makes total sense.
Mhm.
Ralph, I'm curious, based on everything you know about electric vehicles, if you were to recommend between a battery electric, hydrogen fuel cell, hybrid vehicle, what would you recommend to your standard commuter and why?
So the government, NHTSA kind of says the average driver does this 30 miles a day. And I fall into that, especially working remotely, where we're not all going into the office every day. So for me, and for most Americans, a straight battery electric vehicle makes the most sense for me. And that's because I have a secure place to park it at night with a charging station in the garage. So I can start my day and kind of have that home-based charging. So if you're thinking about an electric vehicle, the considerations right kind of off the top of your head are how much you're going to drive it per day in each run, I would say. And do you have a secure place to park it and plug it in when you get there? If you're in an apartment building and you're sharing one of two charging stations, that could get full and you'd be waiting in line pretty quickly. So the dedicated charging, in my opinion, kind of goes right to the top of the list is a battery electric vehicle right for me. And that's a level 2, 220 charger that will do 80% charge in, a half hour or so, is kind of what even less than that for many OEMs.
Yeah, no, and that's actually a fantastic segue to our next topic here regarding charging, right? A lot of consumers want to know how much cost is involved in this and what kind of hassle is involved. As a consumer, folks want to know, am I going to save money compared to buying gasoline? Well, with today's gas prices, I think it's a pretty confident bet that, yeah, pretty sure you're going to be able to. But then it comes to the hassle. So, Mike, just for education purposes, we're aware that there are 3 different types of charging, and really 2 of them are meant for, potential for home consumers. Would you be so kind as to run through those 3 different types of charging systems for us, please?
Yeah, so there's level 1, 2, and 3. Level 1 is just 110. You can plug it in your normal outlet you're used to seeing everywhere. And yet, like I said, for the Volt with its lower capacity, like she's been able to charge 110 overnight and fill it up overnight. But with something with a more capacity, a full BEV, that charging 110 overnight will get plenty, just as much distance, but can you get more like 100 miles or something, it would take a bit longer. And that's where you get to level 2. Level 2 is now you need a dedicated, it's a lot harder to find a 220 plug. So most likely it's something that's installed at your house as a charging and wired by a electrician into 220, or when you go somewhere to a parking lot, a lot of those that you see are 220 because they're wired permanently that way. And those will get you a significant more, and most people should be able to fill up their vehicle overnight. If you drove hundreds of miles, you can still fill that up overnight, no problem, or get a good top off if you stop at a parking lot that has one. Then the next level is level 3. It's a lot higher level of charging rates depending on what the system is. A lot of the newer ones are really high that, like you say, you can fill up in a half hour, and those are very specific to places that are gearing towards having that available for people, right? That there's more and more of those going in at some gas stations, more in those, in I guess shopping malls where they have some things that you can do for the half hour while you're waiting to be able to do that. And that's what you're going to use to be able to drive somewhere a bigger distance that you're going to can go, stop for a half hour, fill up quite a bit, and then keep going on your drive.
Makes perfect sense. I think then it's probably fair to say, Mike, and looking to see if you agree with this, that, if you were to recommend to a first-time electric vehicle buyer, right, you can go pick up your electric vehicle. You've got your 110 charging kit that's going to come with it. That's all you need. Take it home, charge your vehicle at night, and you can go about your daily business just like you had before.
Yep. Yeah. With the 110, like I said, it's you can get your 40, 50 miles no problem charging overnight. And if that's what you're just commuting around town on, you'll be fine with that. And then decide if you need more from there.
Right.
And
you can always
Nick,
upgrade later.
I would also offer, I am aware, because I'm on this, wait list for my vehicle, that many of the OEMs are pairing up a preferred charging station and have discounts. So when you buy your vehicle, you can also get a level 2 charger, included in that purchase. The tip here is check with your local power company, because they also offer rebates on buying a charging station, or if you bought an approved one, you get a rebate check, and it's $500 or more. And you can also get a different rate plan that allows you to charge overnight at a reduced rate, similar to how they had the shut off for air conditioning in the summertime.
Interesting. Gotcha. Very cool. All right. Let's go ahead and move on to the next topic here. So this is a pretty broad one as well. How much does an EV cost, right? There's the actual vehicle, there's cost of ownership. We already talked a little bit about charging. So Ralph, you just kind of touched on incentives a bit. Are there also incentives out there at the state, maybe even federal level, for electric vehicle purchases right now?
Well, there is at the federal level for sure. It does expire over time. So there's only so many vehicles each manufacturer can sell to be allowed for the federal rebate. So, if you're buying from a company that's been selling electric vehicles for quite a while, that rebate might have expired and you're no longer eligible. NHTSA has a website which will show what vehicles are currently still eligible, what model year. So I would definitely check that. And then from a additional cost of ownership, I would be calling my insurance company to find out what it costs to insure the vehicle you're looking at. There are entry level electric vehicles, and then there's, high level luxury vehicles that are electric that are, over $100,000 or more. What's the cost to insure the entry level versus that would be something you'd figure into your purchase decision. And in the previous slide, we talked briefly on the charging and the discounts. So here in Michigan, where we're at, Governor, Whitmer has talked about an additional discount tax credit that would go for an EV purchase, but it hasn't been signed into law yet. So $7,500 is my recollection of the current federal rebate. Michigan was talking about another $2,000 on top of that. So it could get, significant off of a sale price of a vehicle. You got to pick the right vehicle. And as I mentioned, Michigan is kind of teasing it. It's not been approved as a law yet, but depending on what state you're working or living in, there could be a state and a federal double up on those discounts.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So that's great information. And I'm curious, Mike, we know that electric vehicles have a broad range of prices, right? You can get an electric vehicle for as low as, $24,000, $25,000 US, and you can still spend well over $100,000 on an electric vehicle. But in terms of demand, like if I wanted to go buy an electric vehicle today and pick one up in the next week or two, what's that look like for me?
I don't know what availability looks like out there. I don't think it's much different than the rest of the car market right now, which is, that all automakers are limited in the supply chain limitations of parts. And there's nothing different in the electric vehicle market. Of course, some of the manufacturers that are adding in, they're starting at lower volumes, so they're a little bit more limited. But I think for sure in the next couple of years, it's going to very much expand of what's available out there, just as far as things to pick from. And then hopefully we get out of the supply chain, so it'll become a lot easier. But definitely they're out there and can shop around for sure, and then get, like Ralph did, put yourself on a waiting list and go for it.
Yeah, no, makes total sense. No, I appreciate that. So how about cost of maintenance, right? On your standard internal combustion engine vehicle, right, that burns gas, there's a lot of parts. There's a lot of mechanical parts. I am aware that on an EV there are less, of course. So, I mean, Ralph, what are some of the big differences when it comes to maintenance costs when you're comparing your standard ICE vehicle to an electric vehicle?
Mm-hmm. So cost of maintenance is a purchasing factor that some people put a lot of stock in and research quite heavily, and others don't give it a second look. So you have to look at yourself and say, who am I? Am I the one who researches that for my last 3 vehicles, or have I never thought about it? If you've never thought about it, you're in for a pleasant, surprise that says the electric vehicles don't have as many systems or not as complex as Nick alluded to. So that means there's less to maintain. You will never have to go to a Midas or a Tuffy muffler shop to have a rusted out muffler installed on your battery electric vehicle. You will never have to go to a quick oil change place to have an oil change done. And over the 6 to 10 years you're going to own this vehicle, that can really add up. You will, however, be stopping to get brakes and tires. So there, a lot of the same things apply. It's just a few things are, not on the checklist for a battery electric vehicle. There's nothing that I'm aware of that says this is new. You have to do this on battery electric. You don't do it on an ICE engine, other than taking good care of your battery. And there's OEM specific information on how to not damage the battery.
Makes sense. So what about, Mike, what about if you've got an electric vehicle and you want to get it serviced. I know there's a few different methods that are being employed out there, and they differ greatly between your traditional OEMs and your startup electric vehicle manufacturers as well. So can you just touch on a little bit of, maybe, are there any differences if I'm an EV buyer and I need to get my vehicle serviced? Are there any differences between the traditional setup with your standard OEM and startups?
Yeah, I think some of the newer companies are coming up with different methods. And I think all companies are really stepping back and looking at how do we connect with our customer and listen to the customer of what kinds of things they want to be able to do. But it is a part of that companies are doing things a little bit that I think Tesla for sure is more connected into being able to come to the vehicle versus you bringing it to them. But it's also a factor of there's not Tesla dealerships all over the place. So it just changes where you go and how you do it. Both are time away from your vehicle as it gets serviced. So it's just a matter of a little bit different. But the big companies that have dealerships all over the place are standing on that network and continuing to utilize that same network that they have.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. I think that the push for so many new startup electric vehicle manufacturers and the need to service them has really been pushing the boundaries of remote diagnostics and other things that we could probably have a whole separate webinar on. But it's really cool stuff. I think it's making a real positive impact. So with that, I think we covered costs pretty well, and maintenance. The single biggest thing on everybody's minds, I think, is safety, right? Because these vehicles are so different from the vehicles that we've been driving on the roads for decades and decades. Not that those have always been safe either, because your standard internal combustion engine vehicle is driving around with quite a large load of flammable fuel on a regular basis. But when it comes to EVs, let's get down to that type of thing. Mike, from a collision standpoint, electric vehicle safety, what are your thoughts? Safer, just as safe?
So even though the powertrain is different, there's really nothing different about the crashworthiness of vehicles, right? So there's regulations from NHTSA around crashworthiness and how they are, the requirements that all the cars have to meet and how they measure them and how they rate them, right? So you can go online and look at the 4-star, 5-star vehicles to be able to see what they are. And there's no difference in the requirements that manufacturers meet and how they rate them for EVs and non-EVs. So from a crash standpoint, there's no real difference between them other than, yeah, some are higher rated and some are lower, but that's just vehicle to vehicle and not having to do with it being an EV.
Total sense. Makes total sense. Ralph, what about from a hands-on maintenance standpoint for owners? I know I've seen quite a few electric vehicles been involved. I know there's a high voltage system that runs through there that's coated with an orange coating to kind of highlight that. But I mean, are these things dangerous, or are they just as safe as your standard vehicle?
They're dangerous if not treated with respect. So think about the lineman who's been servicing the power grid along the roads into your house. He's been dealing with high voltage for many years, and those are people who are professionals in the space, and they have the right tools and equipment to handle that high voltage. Every electric vehicle has a master shutoff that the technicians in the authorized repair centers are aware of, and they know how to de-energize a vehicle before any repair should be done. As the layperson, if I'm a consumer and I open the hood, you alluded to the orange wiring. So part of the requirement in North America with the government and NHTSA was to identify any of those high voltage wiring. So if you open the hood and look at anything orange, that's the do not touch wire. I'd also say that most of the public may not be aware that we're doing things to keep the first responders safe. So if I'm in a crash and they need to use the jaws of life to extricate me and the passengers from the vehicle, there's what's called a first responders guide for every electric vehicle sold in the US. And it tells that fireman, that first responder, where he can cut and where he should stay away from for his safety and for the occupant, so that they can safely extricate people. So a lot of forethought has gone into safety and the whole all the way around. And it goes right to de-energizing the battery and recycling it as well. So we don't throw these away when we're done. They get properly recycled and don't damage the earth. So, you know, we could have a whole webinar just on EV safety. It's that big a topic.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it's also a great segue into what's going to happen to the battery after it's seen its end of life. Are there other purposes? So Mike, I know you've got some knowledge, some background on this. So can you speak briefly about the environmental impact of the battery, and are there any uses for these batteries after they've seen the end of their life in a vehicle?
Yeah, I know that's definitely a consideration that all the companies are looking into, is how to recycle and reuse and recycle them after their life. When you throw an engine block in into the scrap heap, you know, they find the metal pieces and melt them down and recycle them. And it's no different of things that they're planning for batteries when they come out of vehicles, that they go back. And there's a market currently for people just using them for backup power in houses and things like that, that they are, even though it may be end of life for a vehicle and the vehicle is worn out, the battery still has plenty of usability to it to be able to do that. And then be able to, you know, when they do have to eventually take them apart, to how to recycle all the pieces of the battery also. Definitely a huge thing that everyone is creating that map for everybody to have.
That's good. It's good that there's that forethought there, you know. Makes total sense to worry about that, because you know the half-life of batteries and how to reuse them is an important topic, especially when electric vehicles are, you know, a lot of the point is to help with the environment, right? First and foremost. So it makes total sense. We do have a question that we got from the audience here that I'd like to pitch over to you guys. It is regarding the cost of a level 2 charging system. So this one's from Kimberly Dawson. She's asking, you know, what is the anticipated cost to have a level 2 charging station installed for home charging? Do either one of you, can either one of you wager a guess on the estimated cost for something like that?
Well, I can relate my personal experience. So the, as Mike mentioned earlier, the 220 plug that you need in your garage, I had to pay an electrician $300 to extend my internal house wiring to put a plug that would accept a level 2 charge station in my garage, because that wiring wasn't there. Many of the houses they're building today, they're thinking about that and putting the 220 location in the garage. As a consumer, you need to look at what vehicle you're going to purchase, because sometimes the charge port's right in the center of the hood, sometimes it's on the left side of the vehicle, sometimes it's on the right. The more progressive OEMs have that plug on both sides, so you can have a charge station on either side. You can only use one at a time, but it makes it your situation where your charge station a little more flexible. You can back the car in or pull it in forward depending. So $300 was to get the plug. I mentioned rebates here in Michigan. Consumers Power had a $500 rebate. The charge station that I had to purchase, or didn't have to, I chose to purchase, was $650, and I got a $500 rebate. So total cost, you know, $450, and I have level 2 charger in my garage. I'd say that's fairly typical, although the outliers, people can do it for less, and on the flip side, it can be several $1,000s if you have to go hundreds of feet to get that 220 line into your garage, or you want an outside, you know, post with your weatherproof charge station outside. So when you see these stores that have invested in charge stations outside, that's not a trivial investment for the charge station itself, the concrete work, the underground digging, getting the line there. They didn't do that for no reason at all. And it was a one-time investment that they're hoping in many cases you will spend time at their location because of that convenience for charging.
Yeah, it sounds like it depends based on the application, right? Are we going to do one of those outside charging stations that are weatherproof? We're going to just run it off from inside the garage maybe, but it doesn't sound like it's going to cost oodles and oodles and oodles of money to be able to get one of these installed.
When you think of your weekly gas savings, it could be an easy decision.
Yep.
Yeah. And some manufacturers are looking at incentives or including in different levels with that, knowing that that's one of the main questions that comes up, that Kimberly's not the first one to ask that.
Yeah, for sure. There's plenty of good resources out there for sure. We'll actually be sharing at the for all of those who registered and attended the webinar, we'll actually be sending out a buyer's guide to be able to assist with maybe some additional questions and things of that nature around this topic. We are at the end of our scheduled webinar here, so I'd like to thank you both for attending as panelists and providing your knowledge for folks here. The link to the recording and the buyer's guide will be available around 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time today to all of those who have registered. We do thank you for your time, your attendance. The only thing we might ask is if you found this helpful, please share it with one other person. And if you want to get in contact with us, ask any additional follow-up questions, you can hit us up individually on LinkedIn, each one of us, or you can contact us through twiddle.com/EV or webinar@twiddle.com. And we're happy to answer any additional questions you folks might have. Again, thank you. Appreciate your time, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thank you.